My roommate announced to our friends. I'm kicking her out. This is my apartment. Everyone looked at me. I smiled and said, actually, check the lease. My name's the only one on it. You have 30 days. The glass of Pinot Grigio in Sienna's hand trembled slightly as she raised it for a toast, the condensation dripping onto the refinished oak table I had purchased with my holiday bonus 3 years ago. It was 8:14 p.m. on a Friday in mid-October, and our living room, technically my living room, though the distinction had been eroded by 18 months of psychological attrition, was filled with 12 of our mutual acquaintances. The air smelled of expensive cheese, and the cloying, synthetic vanilla of the candles Sienna insisted on burning, despite my repeated mentions of my asthma triggers. I sat at the corner of the table, squeezed between a fiddle-leaf fig plant I was allergic to and Greg, a freelance graphic designer who had spent the last 20 minutes explaining to me why my career as a forensic accountant sounded soulless. Sienna, wearing a silk slip dress that I knew for a fact cost $350 because the charge was still sitting on my credit card statement as a disputed transaction, cleared her throat. She loved this. She loved the silence that fell over the room, the collective gaze of a dozen people validating her existence. She smiled, that practiced, dazzling smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the same smile she used when she asked to borrow money or needed a ride to the airport at 4 a.m. Guys, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that forced everyone to lean in. I have some news. Big news. She paused for effect, glancing at her boyfriend, Kyle, a man whose primary contribution to the household was empty energy drink cans and a lingering scent of body spray. Kyle smirked, looking at the floor. Sienna took a breath. I've decided to take the next step in my life. This apartment, it's been a journey, but I think it's time for a change. I've decided that Kyle is going to move in next month. She looked directly at me then, her expression shifting into a mask of faux sympathy. Which means, sadly, I'm going to have to ask you to move out, Jane. I know, it's hard, but this is my apartment, and I need to prioritize my future. You understand, right? You can stay until the 1st, of course. I'm not a monster. The room went silent. The silence wasn't the warm, anticipatory hush of a celebration. It was the sharp, jagged silence of a car crash. Greg shifted uncomfortably beside me. Everyone looked at me. They expected tears. They expected a scene. They expected the Jane that Sienna had painted for them over the last year. The charity case. The chaotic roommate. The one who was lucky to be allowed in Sienna's orbit. I looked at Sienna. I looked at the way her hand rested possessively on the table I owned. I looked at the walls painted a shade of greige I hadn't chosen. And then I felt a physical shift in my chest, like a heavy iron door slamming shut. It was the end of my empathy. I picked up my phone, which was sitting face down on the table, and unlocked it. I swiped open my email app to a specific PDF document I had saved earlier that afternoon. I didn't yell. My voice was incredibly soft, almost conversational. Actually, Sienna, I said. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in months. Check the lease. I slid my phone across the table, the screen glowing bright in the dim light. My name is the only one on it. This is my apartment. I am the sole leaseholder. I pay the rent. I paid the security deposit. You are a guest. And as of this moment, you are a guest who has overstayed her welcome. You have 30 days, the legal minimum. The silence that followed was different. It was the vacuum of a lie collapsing under the weight of documentable reality. To understand the geometry of that moment, the sheer architectural weight of that vindication, you have to understand the 18 months of slow-motion erosion that preceded it. It didn't start with malice. It never does with narcissists. It started with a crisis. We had met in college 7 years prior, but we drifted apart until she messaged me on a Tuesday in March 2023. She was crying. Her voice message was 4 minutes and 12 seconds of hyperventilating panic. Her boyfriend had kicked her out. She had nowhere to go. She had lost her job as a social media coordinator for a boutique gym. She was sleeping in her car. I was 27, a forensic accountant making $115,000 a year, living in a spacious, light-filled 2-bedroom apartment in the historic district. I was lonely. I was naive. I saw a friend in distress, and my instinct was to solve the problem. I told her to come over. I told her she could stay in the guest room for a few weeks until she got back on her feet. That was the first mistake. The mistake wasn't the kindness. The mistake was the lack of boundaries. When she arrived, she came with 3 suitcases and a cat she hadn't mentioned. I am allergic to cats, she cried, saying she couldn't abandon Luna, that Luna was her emotional support animal. I bought antihistamines. I bought a litter box. I paid for the special grain-free food Luna required. Sienna was grateful, effusively so. She wrote me a handwritten letter on cardstock thanking me for saving her life. She posted a photo of us on Instagram with the caption, *angels exist. So blessed to have a soul sister like this. *. It garnered 412 likes. I felt good. I felt useful. But the few weeks turned into a month, then 2. By June, the dynamic had shifted so subtly I almost didn't notice. It started with the utilities. I asked her to contribute to the electric bill, which had spiked due to her habit of leaving the AC on 68 degrees while she was out. She looked at me with wide, wounded eyes. Jane, she said, her voice trembling. You know I'm still looking for work. I spent my last $50 on interview clothes. How can you ask me for money right now? I felt like a predator. I apologized. I paid the bill. I paid the next one too. By August, honest, she had a job. It was a brand ambassador role for a tequila company, mostly working nights and weekends. She claimed she was making good money, but whenever the first of the month rolled around, there was always an emergency. Her car broke down, $600. Her phone screen cracked, $200. Her mom needed help with a medical bill, $400. The rent for the apartment was $2,800 a month. I paid it all, every single month. When I gently suggested that maybe she could contribute $200 just as a gesture, she accused me of being obsessed with money. "You're so transactional, Jane," she said, rolling her eyes as she applied a $60 foundation in the mirror. "Not everything is a spreadsheet. Friends help friends." I retreated. I focused on my work. I spent my days auditing corporate ledgers, tracking embezzled funds, looking for discrepancies in the numbers. I was good at it because I was objective. I dealt in facts. But at home, I was living in a fiction where I was the oppressor, and the woman living rent-free in my guest room was the victim. The territorial invasion was next. It began with the decor. I came home one evening in November to find my vintage movie posters, original prints from the 1,960 seconds that I had collected for years, gone from the living room walls. In their place were framed affirmations printed in gold foil. Asterisk, good vibes only. Asterisk, asterisk, hustle hard. Asterisk, asterisk, manifest it. Asterisk, I stood in the hallway, my briefcase heavy in my hand, staring at the walls. "Where are my posters?" I asked. Sienna walked out of the kitchen, holding a glass of my wine. "Oh, those?" she said breezily. "I put them in the storage closet. They were so dark, the energy was off. I wanted to brighten up the place, make it feel more like Times Us asterisk." That was the first time she used the word Times Us times to describe the property rights. I didn't fight her. I was tired. I was working 60-hour weeks during tax season. I told myself it was just a temporary living arrangement. I told myself I was being petty, but the us quickly morphed into me. She started hosting people when I wasn't there. I would come home to find strangers on my couch, drinking my liquor, watching my television. When I walked in, they would look at me like Times was the intruder. Sienna would say, "Oh, this is Jane. She's the roommate I told you about. Not the owner, not my friend, the roommate, the quiet one, the one who pays the bills but doesn't fit the aesthetic." By Christmas, she was referring to the apartment as my place on social media. Asterisk, cozy nights, at my place. Asterisk, she captioned a photo of her legs on my coffee table. Asterisk, hosting brunch at my place. Asterisk, she wrote under a video of a quiche I had paid for. I saw these posts, and a cold, hard knot began to form in my stomach. It wasn't just annoyance anymore. It was a realization that I was being erased from my own life. But the breaking point, the moment that shifted me from passive victim to active investigator, didn't happen until February of this year. It was a Tuesday. I had come home early from the office because I had a migraine. The apartment was quiet. I walked into the kitchen to get water and saw a piece of mail sitting on the counter. It was an envelope from the building management company, addressed to me, but it had been opened. And then it had been taped shut again, badly. The jagged edge of the Scotch tape caught the light. I stared at it. I knew, with the certainty of a forensic auditor, that Sienna had opened it. I peeled the tape back. It was a lease renewal notice. The rent was increasing by 3%. I looked at the date on the letter. It had arrived 3 days ago. Sienna hadn't mentioned it. Why would she open my mail? Why would she reseal it? I took the letter into my room and locked the door. I sat on my bed and thought, if she was opening my mail, what else was she doing? I turned on my laptop. I logged into my bank account. I scrutinized the last 6 months of transactions. Nothing seemed amiss at first. But then I looked at the household supply purchases. I shared an Amazon Prime account with her, another favor I had granted so she could get free shipping on her makeup. I went to the order history. I scrolled. My breath caught in my throat. There were purchases for items I had never seen. A Dyson Airwrap, $600. A set of Le Creuset cookware, $450. A designer handbag, $1,200. All charged to a credit card ending in 4,098. That wasn't my card. I checked the billing address. It was my address. I checked the name on the card. It was Sienna Miller. Okay, she was using her own card. But then I looked closer at the archived orders. There were other items, noise-canceling headphones, a gaming monitor, a man's watch, all sent to an address in Philadelphia. I didn't know anyone in Philadelphia. I clicked on the invoice. The billing name was Jane Patterson, my name. The card number ended in 7,712. My backup emergency credit card, the one I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I never used. I felt the blood drain from my face. I ran to my desk. I pulled open the bottom drawer. The card was there. It looked untouched. But when I logged into the card's online portal, the balance was $4,822. She had taken the card, written down the numbers, put it back, and had been siphoning money for months to buy gifts for a boyfriend she hadn't even told me about yet. That was the moment the context phase ended and the discovery phase began. I didn't confront her. I didn't scream. I didn't run out into the living room and wave the statement in her face. I am a professional. When I find fraud in a corporate ledger, I don't tip off the CFO. I build a case. I gather evidence. I make sure that when I strike, there is no wiggle room, no explanation. No, it was a misunderstanding. understanding. I closed the laptop. I took a deep breath. I walked out of the room. Sienna was on the couch, watching a reality show. "Hey," she said, not looking up. "You're home early. Do we have any wine left?" I looked at her back. I looked at the woman who was stealing from me, lying to me, and erasing me. "No," I said calmly. "We're out. I'll go get some." I walked out the door, and I went straight to the police station. But I didn't file a report. Not yet. I spoke to a friend of mine, a detective in the fraud division named Marcus. We had worked together on a case involving a Ponzi scheme the year prior. I met him at a coffee shop near the precinct. I showed him the statement. I told him about the mail. He listened, his face grim. "You have her on credit card fraud, Jane," he said, stirring his black coffee. "That's a felony. You can have her arrested tonight." I shook my head. "No," I said. "That's not enough. She'll spin it. She'll say I gave her permission. She'll say it was an accident. She's charming, Marcus. She's a professional victim. If I arrest her now, she becomes the martyr. I need more. I need to destroy her credibility. I need to make sure that when she leaves, she has nowhere to hide." Marcus looked at me. He saw the shift in my eyes. He saw the coldness that had replaced the confusion. "Okay," he said. "What do you need?" "I need a background check," I said. "A real one. I want to know where she lived before. I want to know why she really lost her job. I want to know who else she's done this to. Because people like this, they don't start with a roommate. This is a pattern." Marcus nodded. "I'll make some calls. Give me 48 hours. I went back to the apartment that night with a bottle of cheap wine. I poured Sienna a glass. I sat with her and listened to her complain about her boss at the tequila company. I nodded. I smiled. I played the part of the doormat. But inside, I was recording everything. I started a log. February 14th. Sienna claims she is at work. Instagram location tag shows she is at a bar in Center City. Charges on my stolen card appear at 8:42 p.m. For the Continental. I installed a keylogger on the shared living room computer, which she frequently used when she was too lazy to get her laptop. It was invasive. It was paranoid. It was necessary. I captured her emails. I saw the messages to her mother. Jane is such a pushover. I'm living here for free, basically. She's pathetic. I saw the messages to Kyle, the Philadelphia boyfriend. Yeah, babe, it's basically my place. She's never here. You should come down. I saw the draft of a lease she had photoshopped. She had taken a PDF of my lease, removed my name, inserted hers, and sent it to the utility company to try and get the bills switched to her name, presumably to establish residency rights. That was the smoking gun. Forgery. Identity theft. Fraud. But I still waited. I waited because I wanted the timing to be perfect. I wanted to maximize the damage. I knew she was planning this party in October. I knew she had invited all our mutual friends, plus a few influencers she was trying to impress. She had spent weeks talking about it, curating the playlist, buying decorations with money she borrowed from me. It was going to be her coronation, her official debut as the queen of the apartment. I decided that it would be her execution. The week before the party, I met with my landlord, Mr. Henderson. He was an older man, 72, who liked me because I paid the rent 3 days early every month for 5 years. I brought him a file. I showed him the unauthorized occupant. I showed him the forged lease attempt, which the utility company had flagged but hadn't acted on. I showed him the evidence of the key copying. She had made a copy for Kyle without permission, a violation of Clause 14. Mr. Henderson was furious. He wanted to evict her immediately. I put a hand on his arm. "Wait," I said. "Give me until the 14th. I want to handle this personally." He looked at me, confused. "Why?" he asked. "Because," I said, adjusting my glasses, "she thinks she owns this place, and I need her to say that out loud in front of witnesses. I need her to hang herself." Mr. Henderson grunted, impressed by my ruthlessness. "You write the notice," he said. "I'll sign it." So I wrote the notice. I drafted a notice to quit for unauthorized occupancy and breach of lease terms. I had it notarized. I scanned it onto my phone, and then I waited for Friday night. I waited for the Pinot Grigio. I waited for the toast. And when she said those words, "This is my apartment," I felt a rush of adrenaline so pure it felt like oxygen. It was the trap snapping shut. The inverted outcome was complete. She thought she was evicting me. She had just evicted herself. The room was still frozen. Sienna stared at the phone on the table. She stared at the PDF displayed on the screen. It was the lease, clearly showing Jane Patterson as the sole lessee. It also showed the rider, strictly single occupancy, no sublets, no guests exceeding 14 days, She looked up at me, her eyes wide, the pupils dilated. She laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Jane, stop. You're being weird. It's a joke, right? You're joking." I didn't blink. "I'm not joking, Sienna. I'm also not joking about the credit card fraud." I tapped the screen, swiping to the next image. It was a spreadsheet, a pivot table actually, grouped by merchant category code, showing $4,822.14 in unauthorized charges, or the forgery. I swiped again. The photoshopped lease she had sent to Pico, or the key you gave Kyle. Swiped again. A photo of Kyle's keychain sitting on the counter, the unauthorized copy clearly visible with its distinct brass head. "I have filed a police report as of this morning." I lied. I hadn't filed it yet, but Marcus had the paperwork ready on his desk. "But I'm willing to withhold the criminal charges if you are out by November 1st. And by out, I mean gone. Keys returned. No damages. If there is a single scratch on the floor, a single hole in the wall, I file the charges." Kyle stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Whoa, hold on," he said, puffing out his chest. "You You can't just talk to her like that. We have rights. Squatters' rights. She's lived here for like a year. I looked at Kyle. I looked at him with the boredom of a person watching a fly buzz against a window. Actually, Kyle, I said, turning my gaze to him. In this state, a guest does not establish tenancy if they have not contributed to rent, and if there is a written agreement, even a text message thread, acknowledging their temporary status. I pulled up a text from Sienna dated 6 months ago. Asterisk, thank you so much for letting me crash for a while longer. I promise I'll find a place soon. Asterisk, I showed it to the room. She is a guest. You are a trespasser, and if you don't sit down, I will call the police and have you removed right now. Kyle looked at Sienna. Sienna looked at the table. The influencers and friends were looking at their phones, avoiding eye contact, desperate to be anywhere else. Greg, the graphic designer, cleared his throat. I think I'm gonna go, he mumbled. He stood up. That broke the dam. Everyone stood up. The party was dissolving in real time. Sorry, Jane. See ya, Sienna. Good luck. They filed out, grabbing their coats, leaving their half-finished wine on my table. Within 2 minutes, the apartment was empty, save for me, Sienna, and Kyle. The silence was absolute. Sienna wasn't crying anymore. The mask had fallen completely. Her face was twisted into a sneer of pure, unfiltered hatred. You bitch, she hissed. You calculated bitch. You planned this. You let me set this up just to humiliate me. I picked up my wine glass. I took a sip. It was crisp, cold, and tasted like justice. Yes, I said. I did. Consider it rent. Now, get out of my sight. I'm going to watch a movie. In the living room. Asterisk. My Times living room. I turned my back on them and walked toward the couch, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. I knew this wasn't over. I knew the next 30 days would be a war of attrition, but I also knew that for the first time in 18 months, I was the one holding the weapons. I sat down, picked up the remote, and turned on the TV. Behind me, I heard Sienna storm into the guest room and slam the door so hard the walls shook. I didn't flinch. I just turned up the volume. The following 30 days were not a living situation. They were a siege. The apartment, once a sanctuary of mid-century modern minimalism and quiet order, transformed into a psychological combat zone where the weapon of choice was presence. I didn't sleep that first night. I lay in my bed with the door locked, a heavy chair wedged under the handle, a precaution that felt melodramatic until I heard the handle jiggle at 3:17 a.m. It wasn't a forceful attempt to enter, just a testing of the perimeter, a reminder that the enemy was inside the gates. I lay there listening to the muffled sounds of Sienna and Kyle arguing in the guest room, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm of toxic codependency. I heard glass shattering at 4 a.m. I didn't get up to investigate. I simply noted the time in the log on my phone. Asterisk, October 14th, 0400. Potential property damage, sound of breaking glass, guest room, asterisk. The next morning, Saturday, I initiated the scorched earth defense protocol I had mapped out with Marcus at 8 a.m. While they were still hungover and asleep, I quietly packed my most valuable portable assets, my laptop, my grandmother's jewelry, my passport, and the hard drive containing the backups of my work into a gym bag. I took them to a climate-controlled storage facility on 4th Street and rented a 5x5 unit for $145 a month. I wasn't going to give her leverage. I wasn't going to give her anything she could hold hostage. When I returned to the apartment, the living room was a disaster site. The breaking glass I had heard was a framed photo of my parents, swept off the console table. The glass was pulverized into the rug. The photo itself had been ripped in half. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I took a photo of the damage, time-stamped 9:12 a.m. I uploaded it to the cloud folder shared with my attorney. Then I swept it up, vacuumed the rug, and sat down at the table with my coffee and a book. When Sienna finally emerged at 11 a.m., she looked like a wraith. Her mascara was smeared, her hair was a bird's nest, and she radiated a palpable, vibrating hatred. She walked into the kitchen, ignored me, and opened the fridge. She took out a carton of almond milk, my almond milk, and drank directly from the carton, making eye contact with me the entire time. It was a petty, primal act of dominance. I turned the page of my book. You know you can't actually kick me out, she said, her voice raspy. I looked it up. I have rights. I'm a tenant at will. You have to give me 90 days in this jurisdiction if I've been here longer than a year. I looked up calmly. Actually, Sienna, I said, my voice steady. Under Pennsylvania Landlord-Tenant Act of 1951, Section 250.501, a guest who does not pay rent and is not on the lease is considered a licensee. Once the license is revoked, which I did last night, verbally and in writing, you are a trespasser. I am giving you 30 days as a courtesy to avoid the immediate involvement of the sheriff's department, but if you want to test the 90-day theory, we can go to court. But be warned, if we go to court, I will add the credit card fraud charges to the docket and the forgery. Do you really want a felony record over a security deposit you didn't pay? She slammed the refrigerator door. You're a sociopath, she spat. A cold, unfeeling robot. No wonder you're single. No wonder your parents live 3 states away. They probably can't stand you. I didn't respond. I employed the gray rock method, a psychological strategy for dealing with narcissists where one becomes as uninteresting and unresponsive as a rock. I returned to my book. She stood there for a minute, panting, waiting for the fight, waiting for the emotional fuel she needed to justify her narrative of victimization. When I didn't give it to her, she let out a scream of frustration and stormed back into the bedroom. The next 2 weeks were a study in escalation. Sienna realized that legal threats wouldn't move me, so she pivoted to environmental sabotage. She stopped cleaning completely. Dishes piled up in the sink until they grew mold. She turned the thermostat up to 80 degrees while I was at work, trying to spike my utility bill. She accidentally spilled red wine on the beige sofa. Each time, I documented it. Asterisk, October 18th. Thermostat set to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. October 20th. Unwashed dishes attracting fruit flies. October 22nd. Upholstery damage. Asterisk, I didn't clean up after her. I bought paper plates for myself. I kept my door locked. I installed a Wise security camera in the living room and pointed it at the front door, ostensibly for security, but really to monitor who was coming and going. She tried to cover it with a sock. I sent her a text. Asterisk, tampering with security devices in the common area is a violation of your conditional stay. Remove the sock or I call the police. Asterisk, the sock was gone when I got home. But the real turning point, the moment the discovery phase transitioned into the climax, happened on October 27th, 5 days before the deadline. I came home from work to find the police at my door. 2 officers, uniformed, hands resting on their belts. My heart hammered, but I forced my breathing to slow. Officer Miller, the taller one, stepped forward. Ma'am, are you Jane Patterson? I nodded. We received a call about a domestic disturbance, he said. A resident named Sienna Miller claims you threatened her with a knife and locked her out of the bathroom. I stared at him. The inverted outcome hook was in play. She was trying to Darvo me, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. She was trying to get a restraining order to force me out of my own apartment. I didn't get defensive. I didn't raise my voice. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Officer, I said, I have been at the Deloitte offices in Center City since 7:30 a.m. I have badge swipe data to prove it. I also have a camera in the living room that records all movement in the common areas. Would you like to see the footage from the last 12 hours? The officer's demeanor shifted instantly. He looked at his partner. Yes, ma'am, we would. I unlocked the app. I scrolled through the timeline. The apartment was empty all day until Sienna came out of her room at 4:15 p.m., made a phone call, and then sat on the couch to wait for them. There was no knife. There was no argument. There was just a woman fabricating a crime. I showed them the video. Officer Miller watched it in silence. He sighed, the weary sigh of a man who hates domestic disputes. He turned to the door where Sienna was standing, looking triumphant, waiting for me to be handcuffed. Miss Miller, he said, his voice hard. Step out here, please. She walked out, smirking at me. Did you get her? She asked. Did you get the knife? Ma'am, Officer Miller said, filing a false police report is a misdemeanor in this state. We have video evidence that contradicts your statement. We have proof the homeowner was not even on the premises. We are going to issue you a citation, and I suggest you pack your bags. If we have to come back here, you're the one leaving in cuffs. Sienna's face crumbled. The smirk vanished, replaced by the terrified realization that her reality distortion field didn't work on law enforcement. She burst into tears, real, ugly tears of self-pity. You're all against me, she screamed. She pays you, doesn't she? She bribed you. The officers just shook their heads and handed her the citation slip. I stood there, silent, witnessing the total collapse of her strategy. It was the moment the power dynamic shifted permanently. She wasn't just a bad roommate anymore. She was a criminal liability, and now the state knew it. The final countdown began. October 28th, 29th, 30th. The apartment was silent. Sienna stayed in her room. Kyle stopped coming over. Presumably, he didn't want to be an accessory to her legal spiral. On October 31st, Halloween, I took the day off work, not to celebrate, but to prepare. I had hired a moving company, Rapid Relocation, paying them $850 for a pack-out service. It was an expense I shouldn't have had to bear, but I knew Sienna wouldn't pack. She would wait until the deadline, then claim she didn't have time or couldn't find boxes, hoping to extend her stay through sheer incompetence. I wasn't going to allow that. I also hired an off-duty sheriff's deputy to perform a civil standby. It cost me $400 for 4 hours. It was the best money I ever spent. November 1st, 8 a.m., the deadline. I unlocked my bedroom door and walked into the living room. The movers were already downstairs, waiting for my signal. The deputy, a large man named Sergeant Reynolds, was standing in the hallway. I knocked on Sienna's door. It was locked. Sienna, I said, it's 8 a.m. Your tenancy is terminated. You need to vacate. Silence. I knocked again. Harder. Sienna, I have the sheriff's department here. We are coming in. I heard a shuffle, then a defiant scream. Go to hell. I'm not ready. I'm sick. I have the flu. You can't evict a sick person. I looked at Sergeant Reynolds. He nodded. He stepped forward and pounded on the door. Police! Open up! The authority in his voice was absolute. The lock clicked, the door opened, the smell hit us first. It was a physical wall of ammonia, stale fast food, and unwashed body odor. The room, which had been a pristine guest suite 18 months ago, was a landfill. Clothes were piled knee-high on the floor. There were takeout containers everywhere, some with fuzzy mold growing on the leftovers. And the cat litter box, it looked like it hadn't been changed in weeks. The cat, Luna, was cowering under the bed, hissing. Sienna was sitting on the bed, wrapped in a duvet, looking small and furious. I didn't engage. I turned to the movers who had just entered. "Gentlemen," I said, pointing to the piles. "Everything in this room goes. Box it up. Move it to the curb." "Be careful with the cat," Sienna shrieked. "You can't touch my stuff. That's illegal." Sergeant Reynolds stepped into the room. "It's not illegal, ma'am. You were given notice. The lease is terminated. These men are helping you move. I suggest you get dressed and grab your valuables, unless you want them to pack your underwear for you." Sienna froze. She looked at the movers, burly men in blue uniforms, who were already efficiently sweeping armfuls of clothes into wardrobe boxes. She looked at the sergeant. She looked at me, and she broke. She scrambled out of bed, grabbing her purse, her phone, and the cat carrier. She didn't fight. She didn't scream anymore. She just frantically threw things into a suitcase, sobbing the whole time. It took 3 hours. The movers were efficient machines. They stripped the room bare. The mattress, stained and ruined, went to the trash. The furniture, scratched by the cat, went to the curb. By 11:30 a.m., the room was empty. Sienna stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by a fortress of cardboard boxes and black garbage bags. Kyle had finally shown up with his pickup truck, looking sheepish and avoiding my gaze as he loaded her life into the bed of the Ford F-150. I stood on the balcony, watching them. The neighbors were watching too. Mrs. Gable from 4B was on her porch, shaking her head. The witnesses had shifted. They weren't seeing a poor girl being kicked out. They were seeing a horde being removed. The visual evidence of her chaos was undeniable. I walked back inside. The apartment was quiet, but the smell remained. I walked into the guest room. Now that the clutter was gone, the true extent of the damage was visible. The hardwood floors were stained black in the corners, where the cat had urinated repeatedly. The drywall had holes punched in it, fist-sized craters that she had hidden behind posters. The blinds were shredded. I pulled out my phone. I started a new video log. Asterisk, November 1st, 11:45 a.m. Post-move-out inspection. Asterisk. I narrated the damage calmly, zooming in on every scratch, every stain, every hole. I estimated the repairs in my head. Asterisk floor, refinishing, $1,200. Drywall patch and paint, $800. Deep cleaning and ozone treatment for the smell, $500. Blinds replacement, $300. Asterisk. The total damage was close to $3,000. My security deposit was intact, but she owed me for this. This wasn't wear and tear. This was vandalism. I finished the video. I walked to the kitchen and made a cup of tea. My hands were finally shaking, the adrenaline crash hitting me all at once. I sat at the table she had toasted at 2 weeks ago, and looked at the empty space where her chaos used to be. I was alone. I was tired. My bank account was lighter by nearly $2,000 from the movers and storage, but the air was mine. The silence was mine. I took a sip of tea. I wasn't done yet. The physical removal was just the first step. The aftermath phase was next. I had the credit card fraud evidence. I had the police report for the false domestic disturbance claim. I had the video of the damage. I had the invoice for the repairs I was about to schedule. I opened my laptop. I didn't go to Netflix. I went to the website for the Philadelphia Municipal Court. I downloaded the forms for a civil complaint. I wasn't just going to let her drive away into the sunset. She had stolen my money, damaged my home, and tried to ruin my reputation. I was going to retrieve every single cent. The narcissist thinks the story ends when they leave the stage. They don't realize that for the survivor, the story ends when the ledger is balanced. And I am, after all, an accountant. I started typing. Asterisk plaintiff, Jane Patterson. Defendant, Sienna Miller. Count 1, breach of contract. Count 2, conversion of property. Count 3, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Asterisk, I typed until the sun went down. The apartment grew dark, but I didn't turn on the lights. I liked the dark. It helped me focus on the glow of the screen, the only light that mattered, the light of accountability. I spent the next week in a frenzy of restoration. I hired a professional biohazard cleaning crew, a bit extreme perhaps, but I wanted the DNA of the trauma erased. They used an ozone generator that hummed for 24 hours, stripping the oxygen of the scent of cat urine and stale perfume. I had the floors sanded and restained a shade darker, a rich walnut that felt more serious, more grounded. I patched the drywall myself, the physical act of spackling and sanding feeling therapeutic, like I was healing the wounds of the house. While the paint dried, I compiled the master file. This was a 3-inch binder containing every text message, every bank statement, every photo of damage, the affidavit from the police officer, and the invoices for the repairs. I organized it with color-coded tabs: asterisk blue, financial fraud; red, property damage; yellow, harassment; asterisk. It was a thing of beauty. On November 10th, I received a notification from Venmo. It was a request from Sienna. Asterisk. Requesting $500 for emergency hotel stay. Note, you literally made me homeless. I have nowhere to go. Have a heart. I stared at the screen. The audacity was breathtaking. She was still trying to play the game. She was still trying to press press the guilt button that had worked so well for 18 months, but the wiring had been cut. I didn't decline the request. I blocked her on Venmo, then I blocked her on Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat. I didn't want to see her sob story posts. I didn't want to see the vague booking about fake friends and betrayal. I went to the post office and sent a certified letter to her mother's address in Ohio, her only known permanent address. It contained the demand letter. Asterisk, Dear Miss Miller. Enclosed is an itemized list of damages and stolen funds totaling $8,345.22. You have 14 days to remit payment in full. Failure to do so will result in immediate legal action in small claims court and the filing of criminal charges regarding the credit card fraud. Asterisk, I walked out of the post office into the crisp November air. I felt lighter. The context was a memory. The discovery was a weapon. The climax was a victory. Now I was just cleaning up the mess, but there was one loose end: the friends, the 12 people who had been at the party, the ones who had walked out. I hadn't heard from any of them. They were likely in the witness limbo, unsure of who to believe, probably seeing Sienna's tearful posts and wondering if I really was a monster. I debated letting it go, but reputation is an asset, and I protect my assets. I drafted an email. Subject asterisk, regarding the lease termination and fraud investigation. Asterisk, I didn't send it to everyone, just to the ones who mattered, Greg, and a few others who I actually respected. I kept it brief. Asterisk, I know the situation at the party was uncomfortable. I want to clarify that the eviction was due to a long-term pattern of financial theft, totaling over $4,000 in documented property damage. I have attached the police report regarding the false domestic violence claim she filed against me. I wish Sienna the best, but I could no longer subsidize her lifestyle or endanger my own safety. Asterisk, I hit send. It wasn't an apology. It was a press release, a correction of the record. 2 hours later, Greg replied, asterisk, Jane. Holy Shaft times T. I had no idea about the credit card. She told us you gave it to her for groceries. I'm so sorry. Let me know if you need help with the repairs. I'm free this weekend. Asterisk, I smiled. The truth, when supported by documentation, acts as a solvent. It dissolves the lies and leaves only what is real. I closed my laptop. I looked around my living room. The Good Vibes Only posters were in the trash. My vintage movie posters were back on the wall, times Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window times, and times The Third Man, asterisk. Stories about surveillance, about seeing what others miss. They fit perfectly. I poured myself a glass of wine, a Pinot Noir this time, earthy and complex. I wasn't just a roommate anymore. I was the landlord of my own life, and the rent was finally paid. The lawsuit hearing was scheduled for January 12th. I spent Christmas alone, by choice. I decorated the apartment exactly how I wanted. White lights, no tinsel, the scent of pine and cinnamon, real cinnamon sticks, not a candle. I bought myself the Le Creuset set she had tried to buy with my money. I cooked a beef bourguignon that took 6 hours. I ate it in silence, listening to jazz. It was the most peaceful holiday I had ever experienced. But the peace was a discipline. I knew Sienna wouldn't show up to court. Narcissists avoid accountability at all costs. They don't stand in front of judges because judges deal in facts, and facts are kryptonite to their false selves. I was right. On January 12th, I stood in the small claims courtroom. The docket was called asterisk Patterson v. Miller. Asterisk I stepped forward. The defendant's table was empty. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, looked at the empty seat. Is the defendant present? She asked. Silence. I handed the bailiff the proof of service. The certified letter had been signed for by her mother. She had been notified. The judge looked through my binder. She looked at the credit card statements. She looked at the photos of the damage. She looked at the text messages. She flipped the pages in silence for 5 minutes. Then she looked up at me. Judgment for the plaintiff, she said. Default judgment in the amount of $8,345.22, plus court costs. And Miss Patterson? Yes, Your Honor. I suggest you take this file to the district attorney. This credit card activity. This is not a civil matter. This is grand larceny. I nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. I walked out of the courthouse with a piece of paper that said I was right. It wasn't a check. I knew I would likely never see the money. Sienna was judgment-proof. No assets, no steady job, likely hopping from one couch to another. But the paper mattered. It was the resolution of the legal arc. I did take the file to the DA. They opened a case. A warrant was issued for her arrest on charges of access device fraud. It was a bench warrant, meaning they wouldn't hunt her down. But if she ever got pulled over for speeding or tried to get a background check for a job, she would be flagged. It was a landmine I planted in her future, a silent, waiting consequence. I went back to my life. I got a promotion at Deloitte. I started dating a man named David, an architect who had his own apartment and paid for his own dinner. He was kind. He was stable. He respected boundaries. When he stayed over, he asked if he could use the shower. He bought groceries. It felt strange at first, the absence of drama. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the sudden request for money, for the passive passive-aggressive comment. It never came. I realized that trauma had rewired my expectations, and I had to actively unlearn the defensive crouch I had lived in for so years. 1 year later, November 1st, 2024, I was sitting at my desk reviewing a forensic audit for a construction firm. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from LinkedIn. People you may know. I clicked it. It was Sienna. She had blocked me on everything else, but she must have forgotten LinkedIn, or perhaps she created a new profile. The photo was heavily filtered. Her title was Freelance Lifestyle Consultant, Digital Nomad. Her location was listed as Bali, Indonesia. I scrolled through her recent activity. It was a stream of posts about leaving toxicity behind, healing in the jungle, and manifesting abundance. There was a photo of her in a yoga pose on a beach. She looked tan, thin, and manic. The caption read, "Asterisk, sometimes you have to walk away from people who don't understand your light. So grateful for this journey. Number, new beginnings. Number, Bali life." Asterisk, I looked closer at the photo. In the background, barely visible, was a backpack. It looked worn, and next to it, a cat carrier. My stomach twisted. Luna. She had dragged that poor cat halfway across the world. Or maybe she had abandoned him. I didn't know. I couldn't save everyone. I looked at the digital nomad title. I knew what that meant. It meant she was running. Running from the warrant in Pennsylvania. Running from the debt. Running from the bridge she had burned with me. She was in exile. A self-imposed exile disguised as a spiritual journey. I felt a pang of pity, sharp and brief. It must be exhausting, I thought, to be her. To constantly have to invent a new reality because the old one keeps collapsing under the weight of your own lies. To never have a home, only a series of temporary stages. I looked around my apartment. The light was streaming in through the clean windows, hitting the refinished walnut floors. The fiddle leaf fig was thriving. I had found a spot for it where I didn't touch it. The lease renewal was on the counter, signed for another 2 years. This was real. This was solid. I didn't need to manifest abundance. I had built security. I moved my mouse to the block button on her profile. I hesitated for a second, then clicked. Her face disappeared. The Bali life vanished. I went back to my spreadsheet. The numbers balanced. They always do, if you look hard enough. The aftermath was over. The books were closed. I was in the black. The 2 years that followed the closure of the Sienna Miller chapter were characterized by an aggressive, almost militant commitment to structure. For a forensic accountant, stability is both a professional necessity and a personal luxury. I moved out of the apartment not because I had to, but because I wanted a total psychological break from the 4 walls that had served as a battlefield. I purchased a 2-story loft in a newly renovated warehouse conversion, paying the asking price of $985,000 entirely in cash. I hired a structural engineer and an interior designer who specialized in minimalist integrated security systems. My new home was designed like a fortress disguised as an art gallery. Polished concrete floors, concealed lighting, and a state-of-the-art surveillance system with biometric locks. I didn't want to just feel safe. I wanted to be impervious. The resolution phase wasn't passive. It was an active construction of an impermeable self. My relationship with David, the architect, stabilized into a comfortable routine built on mutual respect and separate finances. He never asked about my money. He never used the phrase, "our place." He was the antithesis of the chaos I had purged. He simply existed as an external validation of my newly discovered sanity. We traveled. We saw art. We discussed blueprints and balance sheets. We were 2 adults running 2 separate, solvent lives in parallel, and it was a revelation. My professional life accelerated. The methodical ruthlessness I had honed in evicting Sienna translated into a reputation for clinical efficiency at Deloitte. I was promoted to senior manager and began taking on complex international fraud cases. My specialty became tracing offshore assets, finding the subtle, non-numerical anomalies, the timing of an email, the choice of a shell company's name, the sudden spike in a personal expense account that signaled a narrative break. I was hunting the Gavins and Siennas of the corporate world, and I was deeply, thoroughly good at it. I was known for my master files, the binders I created for every case, organized with the same color-coded precision I had applied to my personal defense. In April 2025, I was brought onto a massive class action suit against a defunct cryptocurrency exchange called Novacoin. It was a high-stakes, high-profile case involving hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of small investors who had lost their life savings. The perpetrators had vanished, leaving behind only a tangle of blockchain addresses and deliberately confusing corporate filings. My job was to find the people behind the addresses. The work was consuming. I spent days in a locked room at the firm, staring at screens filled with hexadecimal code and pivot tables. It was during this deep dive that the final, unexpected piece of the Sienna Miller puzzle landed in my lap, not as a ghost of the past, but as a current, active data point in a totally unrelated financial crime. The primary suspect in the Novacoin fraud was an individual named Trent Holloway. Trent was a classic tech bro fugitive, late 20s, flashy lifestyle, and a social media trail that went cold the moment the exchange collapsed. My team had traced the final movement of the embezzled funds to a bank in the Cayman Islands, but the most damning evidence was a pattern of smaller, less careful personal expenditures made in the months leading up to the collapse. We found a sequence of payments for luxury items, travel, and most interestingly, a series of high-end real estate deposits in Southeast Asia. I was cross-referencing Trent's personal spending habits with known associates, who had also gone silent. I pulled up a detailed report of Trent Holloway's social media connections and recent communications. Trent, we discovered, had a girlfriend who was traveling with him. Her name was listed in a flight manifest under a fake passport, Sophia Matthews. I looked at the photo attached to the flight manifest. It was a heavily filtered, low-resolution profile picture, but the geometry of the face was unmistakable. The chin, the wide-set eyes, the practiced pout. It was Sienna. She hadn't been a digital nomad. She had been a fugitive's accomplice. Her location wasn't Bali, Indonesia. It was wherever Trent Holloway was hiding, living off stolen millions. I felt a chill, not of fear, but of profound professional satisfaction. I was staring at the convergence of two separate, unrelated frauds. The woman who stole $4,000 from me had moved up to stealing $400 million from the public. I leaned back in my chair. She hadn't changed. She had simply scaled. I printed the page, the flight manifest, showing Sophia Matthews, the blurry photo, and the passport number. I didn't show it to the rest of the NovaCoin team. This was my piece of the evidence, and I was going to use it for maximum impact. I walked directly to the office of the lead partner on the case, Mr. Michael Reynolds, no relation to the sheriff's deputy, but the synchronicity was noted. Michael was a man who lived and breathed high-stakes litigation. I placed the document on his massive mahogany desk. Sir, I said, I have identified a significant accomplice to Trent Holloway. Her name is Sienna Miller, currently using the alias Sophia Matthews. But she's not just an accomplice. She's an established financial pattern. I have a history with her. I quickly recounted the Sienna Miller saga, the credit card fraud, the forgery, the outstanding warrant in Pennsylvania, leaving out the personal drama and framing it purely in terms of Time's modus operandi asterisk. She is a serial confidence artist, I concluded. She is Trent Holloway's blind spot. She confirms the psychological profile. He surrounds himself with people who validate his delusions of grandeur. Michael Reynolds listened, his jaw slackening slightly. He picked up the page, looking at the filtered face of Sophia Matthews. You're saying a low-level felon with a bench warrant in Philadelphia is currently fleeing the country with one of the most wanted financial criminals in the U.S.? I nodded. I'm saying she's the one who will make the mistake. She craves attention. She needs to perform. Trent might be hiding in the bunker, but she'll be on the beach posting filtered photos. She is the weak link. Michael smiled, a slow, predatory smile that made him look like a barracuda. Get a full package together, Jane. Everything. The warrant, the credit card statements, the text messages about the rent. Everything that establishes her character. We're going to use her to turn the screws on him. She is the leverage. I spent the next 72 hours building the Sienna Miller file too. It was a testament to my years of meticulous logging. Every piece of evidence, the police citation for the false report, the signed default judgment, the communication with the DA, was presented in a clear, narrative-driven manner. I included the text message from her mother's phone about the emergency hotel stay, not for pity, but to show her history of emotional manipulation. I delivered the file to Michael Reynolds on a secure thumb drive, encrypted and ready for transmission to the FBI's white-collar crime unit. The scale of the revenge was now astronomical. I wasn't getting my $4,000 back, but I was facilitating the capture of a major criminal operation and using the woman who humiliated me as the primary tool of justice. It was procedural, poetic, and entirely detached. The arrest happened 6 weeks later, in May 2025. It didn't make the front page of Times, the Wall Street Journal Times immediately, but it was massive news within the financial community. Trent Holloway was apprehended in a luxury villa in Phuket, Thailand. The detail that confirmed the leverage was the first thing Michael Reynolds told me when he called Jane. She broke immediately. She tried to tell the Thai police that she was a kidnap victim. She showed them the forged passport and cried. When the FBI showed up and presented her with the Philadelphia bench warrant for access device fraud, she went pale. She thought she was being arrested for the $4,000 she stole from you. She thought she was just going back to a small claims court. When they showed her the real indictment for money laundering and conspiracy in the NovaCoin case, she realized the scale of her problem. She flipped. She gave up everything. Trent Holloway was arrested because Sienna Miller, thinking she was protecting her vanity and her minor league crime, gave the FBI the codes to his encrypted phone. It was the attention-seeking, the desperation to control the narrative that finally tripped her up. She couldn't handle the complexity of the crime, the anonymity it required. She needed a stage, even if that stage was a police station, and that need destroyed her and Trent. I sat at my desk and listened to the details. I didn't feel triumph. I felt an immense, quiet calm. I was a structural engineer, and I had just witnessed the controlled demolition of an unstable building. I hung up the phone. I didn't tell David. I didn't tell Greg. I didn't celebrate. The climax was now a matter of public record, a testament to the fact that meticulousness always beats melodrama. Sienna Miller's criminal career, which started in my living room, room, ended in a foreign jail because she thought she was smarter than the lease agreement. She thought she could lie to a forensic accountant. She was wrong. The next few months brought the true resolution of the entire ordeal. The news filtered out. The Times witnesses' Times finally had an objective truth they couldn't ignore. Sienna wasn't just a flaky roommate. She was a felon on the run. The few people who had held out, who had quietly liked her Bailey Life posts or expressed confusion over my eviction, now contacted me with effusive apologies and stunned disbelief. They were embarrassed. They were forced to confront their own judgment and the fact that they had fallen for a manufactured persona over the actual, stable person they knew. I accepted the apologies graciously but kept my distance. My circle was small now. David, Marcus, the detective, and Michael Reynolds at work. People who understood the value of verified data. I had achieved what I set out to do 5 years ago. Not revenge, but the establishment of an undeniable truth. My name was cleared. My property was secured. My future was solid. The final, poetic irony arrived in December 2025, just 3 weeks ago. I was at the office late, working on the civil recovery side of the NovaCoin case. The firm had just been awarded a significant fee. Michael Reynolds walked into my office holding a glossy, heavy stock magazine. It was Time's Forbes asterisk. On the cover was a detailed profile of the NovaCoin collapse and the subsequent arrest. The headline read, asterisk, the ledger always wins. How a forensic accountant traced the fugitives back home. Asterisk. Michael handed me the magazine, open to a 2-page spread. It was a photo of me, standing in my new loft, looking serious and competent. The article detailed my involvement, crediting me with the crucial identity verification that led to the capture. It mentioned my background, my specialization in behavioral auditing, and concluded with a carefully worded paragraph about my early career. Patterson's signature methodical approach was first demonstrated in a complex personal fraud case involving a former associate, which set the tone for her professional life, an unwavering pursuit of clarity against obfuscation. It didn't mention Sienna by name. It didn't mention the credit card, the key, or the moldy dishes. It didn't have to. The context was rewritten entirely. The story of Jane Patterson was no longer the story of the victimized roommate. It was the story of the relentless professional who used her training to enforce justice on a global scale. The narrative was secured. Michael Reynolds looked at the magazine, then at me. You are a star, Jane. This is just the beginning. I smiled. Thank you, Michael. The article included my direct contact information for prospective clients. I knew what would happen next. I would be inundated with requests from high-net-worth individuals, corporations, and law firms, all looking for the woman who could find the needle in the global haystack. I was now a premium service, my reputation cemented by the very chaos I had escaped. I had taken the most painful, humiliating chapter of my life and converted it into an invaluable, monetizable asset. The ultimate irony was complete. I closed the magazine and placed it neatly on my desk, beside my calculator and my coffee cup. The resolution was not just peace, it was power. And that power was silent, documented, and absolute. I am Jane Patterson, senior manager at Deloitte, a sought-after expert in tracing complex financial fraud. I live in my custom-built loft. I date a kind man. My life is clean, solvent, and entirely my own. I have not been asked to leave my home in 1,147 days, and I never will be again. I opened my laptop to begin drafting a response to the latest inquiry from a firm in Zurich. The work was demanding, but the reward was simple. The confirmation that the truth, when documented with forensic rigor, always wins. The ledger, indeed, always balances.